Hey,
Hi.
thank you
It
so much. It worked. This is the first time I've done this. I was all worried that being old would make it not work.
I'm really excited that you are here. This is the first time that you and I have actually seen each other face to face in conversation. We've
Yeah.
only just communicated via Instagram chat boxes. So this is exciting, and I'm seeing that people are showing up. So everybody's excited to hear about your special brand of witchery called Trash Witchery.
Yeah, and I you messaged me and said you want to come talk about it, and I thought this was a I thought this was a great opportunity because I actually hadn't really articulated it to myself before. It
Yeah.
actually it actually started with a friend of mine who called me a trash witch kind of as an insult. Like it was sort of ironic. He was like, "You're such a trash witch," and I was like, "Yeah, that fits." And but after you asked me to do this, I started thinking about how I would actually explain or codify this in a way that's useful to people who do practice, who do engage in what I refer to as woo woo activities. And I mean, I should preface this by saying that I am old and I live in a cave. And for all I know, this is a thing. Like there may be TikToks, there may be a whole. I mean, I did Google and I didn't really find anything, but there may be a whole definition of what being a trash witch is. That I may be completely, somebody may hear this and go, she doesn't know what she's talking about, if this is a thing that I don't know about. So I'm pretty sure that's not the case, but I'm talking from my own understanding. Um, so, I mean, what is a trash witch? It's really easy to reduce it to an aesthetic. There's this kind of like, a collage and garbage and rocks and the punk rock patch vest of occult practice where there's a lot of bricolage and a lot of accumulation and a lot of found objects. Like if you look at my Insta, it's mostly pictures of garbage and graffiti. Um, so you could say urban, you could say found, you could say improvised, you could say, okay, you. Hey, that splendid animal. Good job. So you could say all these things, but when I started thinking about it, and and it just occurred to me, I launched right into this without even being asked.
It's
Figured.
beautiful. It's beautiful. Keep going.
Uh, but I think what it really ultimately is, at least in my case, is about creating a practice as opposed to, learning one from an outside source that is grounded in the place where I personally actually physically am and the
Okay.
time that I actually physically am. I am in Los Angeles, which is where I'm from, on unceded Tongva land. Um, and I've always lived in you know sort of trans in neighborhoods in transition, working class neighborhoods, and um, being in a context that features a lot of sort of, I mean, really institutional failure written large all over everywhere I've lived, and also tremendous resilience in the people and success in this kind of, people make it up as they go along in these environments, and they draw on what's available to them. And when I, like a lot of white girls of my demographic, I came to the idea of, magic and witchcraft and the occult is something that you could actually do, as opposed to read about in stories via Wicca. We found the books when we were in middle school, and I think I found Starhawk first, and then started reading Scott Cunningham and the others, and it, it is all it comes ultimately from Jared Gardner and his kind of very British Isles centric, very Celtic derived concept, which is beautiful and resonates with a lot of people. But, the example that I think of is his Wheel of the Year, right? We
Mm,
have this sort of schematic where spring is a certain thing and summer is a certain thing and fall and winter are certain things, and they all have these associations and their gods and their holidays and stuff like that. But reading about spring and summer in these books is like, this is not where I am. I can understand the resonance of the concepts, but spring here where I live is really January and February. And then March through June is, this kind of strange, unsettled, roiling, weird, kind of anxiety provoking time. It's not this time of burgeoning fertility and everyone cavorting around the maypole with garlands. Like, that's not here.
and where
But
is here for you?
Los
If I'm
Angeles.
okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
Los
Yeah.
Angeles. And and our falls are about wildfires here, and so our wheel is very different from a lot of the structure that's kind of imposed by that particular form of practice.
Mm,
And and I found so much that was beautiful in it when I was really young, and it's like, wow, I want to be cavorting around the maypole with a garland, but that's not where I am. This isn't how life is here. And so it never felt quite right to me. And I always felt kind of foolish, participating, although I know a lot of people, get a tremendous amount out of it. And the focus on environmentalism, for instance, is very important. I don't think any responsible, magical practice cannot be environmentalist to a degree. So that's all valuable and good. But just for my own, you know, chronically earth sign, very sort of pragmatic self, it's like it didn't connect, and then later on I found voodoo via an exhibit at the Fowler Museum that I saw in high school at UCLA.
mm,
And then I knew already that this practice was not for me. That it was, so heavily rooted in the struggle against, colonialism and racism and violence, that it informed the practice so much that it's like I can't, in good conscience really engage with this. But one of the things that I loved was the idea of how people who practice voodoo accumulate and assemble everything as a component of how they serve the Loa. Like when you see an altar to Ezeli and it's got Virginia Slims on it, and it's this one, oh, you know, this is a spirit who has a character and a life, but she's also a person, and she likes Virginia Slims. And so I was like, that's really interesting. Like, how can I make that work in a way that is for me? That how about how drawing kind of endlessly and improvisationally on the environment you're in and the time you're in and the influences in your environment to actually inform your own practice. And that was a really long-winded explanation of how I arrived at this trash witch thing. And so what it's come to.
long-winded or not, it's beautiful. I love it. Please keep going.
Oh, okay. And so, as I develop as a practitioner and become more, humble, I think, and also more sophisticated in how I design ritual and how I design my spaces and how I design my own practice and with my clients when I read tarot. Um, like I'm beginning to realize more and more that, and if you read my blog posts, it's something I bang on about a lot, is that this does not work if at the same time as we're engaging with the energies, we are not we don't have our eyes wide open to what is actually real. Like I can't know where to put myself in the currents if I'm not seeing reality as clearly as I possibly can and as honestly as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And where I live, reality is there's a lot of garbage, there's a lot of poverty, and there's a lot of graffiti, and there's a lot of, kind of this sort of ongoing decay and renewal that is kind of constantly happening in various ways in the place where I live. And so it seems like thinking of that as an engine for my own practice is, the more I do that, the more effective it is. And the more I gain insight and the more I see what I should be doing. I mean, here's this one example. I'm always finding playing cards all over the place, just all over the ground. I go walking and there's playing cards, And, as we know, it's the tarot, right? Without the
Right.
major arcana, but it's unless you find a joker, and it's like, hey, that's a fool, all right. But, and I see them and they talk to me, of course. You can't not see what's effectively a tarot card appear magically on the sidewalk in front of you without thinking that's a thing, and it's correct a lot of the time. But at the same time, why are they there? Why are there playing cards everywhere? It's because there are a lot of unhoused people in my area and they play cards. And the
Hmm.
wind picks up and blows them around, when they're done with their games. And that's why they showed up. And so when I do this and I participate in this, it's like, this is all, at the same time as this is a cue for practice, it's also has to be a reminder of the failures of the institutions. Because this would not if it weren't for the fact that there are so many people living outside where I live. So that's just one way, and so the more I get into that kind of, being where I am space and seeing what's actually physically real around me, the more it develops. It's just this constant process of accumulation and putting the Virginia Slims on the altar.
Hmm. There was one of my teachers, RJ Stewart. I went to a workshop with him, and he spoke about how that as magical practitioners, as people who tune in and hear spirit and work with spirit, that sometimes our job is to just pick up that rock and put it in another spot where somebody else is going to then get the message. So in some ways, those folks who were playing those cards, maybe that was their moment working with spirit, that they were the conduit for the information that was to be shared. I sometimes think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, definitely it could be. We participate in these things all the time without knowing it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and we're always in the currents. That's what I call them, the currents, the field, the woo, the energies.
Yeah.
Um, there are these little touch points. You move the rock and that's a touch point. It's like that's sort of a putting your finger in there and going, okay, I'm here, now what?
Yeah. So for the folks who are listening who want to understand better how to practice what you call trash witchery, noticing the signs, the symbols, the things that are present. Can you give people an understanding of how that you tune in and how that they could also integrate that into their own practice?
The best thing you can do for yourself is to go outside more. Um, the and you know trash witchery is not necessarily something that you need to be in an urban area to do. I don't think. I've talked to people who I consider trash witches who live in very rural areas. But beginning to see this way involves a lot of being out in the world and seeing other people and seeing the environment and noticing things you wouldn't have and kind of making a study of it. I think that you start noticing the synchronicities and the repeating patterns about the place where you actually are. The more you're actually in it and moving your body and moving around and breathing and like open, in kind of a meditative space. And I think that as guilty as I am of it, you know, excessive or, reflexive social media and internet consumption is actively corrosive to this kind of process. And I do it and I scroll and I comment and I like and I do all that stuff and I do it way too much. And there's a lot of valuable information and valuable teachers, all over the place online. But the fact that when you're in a space, a virtual space, if you're on a commercial platform, you are on somebody else's land at that time. The platforms are owned by entities that have their own agenda, that is there for specific commercial purposes, and that's why they exist. That's why we're permitted to be on them in the first place. And so when you're in that energy, you are a subject of a hidden agenda, period. And I'm not even saying that in a conspiratorial way, but I'm saying just the fact that you're teaching somebody else's algorithm about you when you use this stuff, is, I find that it hampers my ability to see what I should be doing as far as practice goes.
Mhm.
You know, if I'm out looking for the signs, or if I'm out looking like, oh, I'm just open to what I'm seeing and what's around me and who the people are, and what things have changed since the last time I was out in this neighborhood or whatever. And I'm thinking of it in terms of something I can put on Instagram.
Yeah.
It's like, gotta kind of turn that off, and experience the place. And it's hard because we've all been conditioned really thoroughly to think in terms of. Uh, so, oh, hey, John, my brother just popped in. Hi. um, but I find that being the first thing to do is to be where you are, to really be where you are, to be outside, to be in the environment, to be aware of the actual practical, economic and political and historical currents of the place where you live, or the place where you are, where you're spending your time, and know those things. And once you do that, you start seeing the tools start falling into your hands. The stories start suggesting themselves, in a certain way. I think that, metaphysical practice is a narrative process. It's a process of storytelling, and that we're storytelling animals, and this is how we find meaning, and this is how we parse our reality, is by telling stories. And um, this thing to me is about telling my own, and the story of the place I am and the people around me. And once I embarked on that a little bit, like, the story started suggesting itself, and then
Yeah.
practice. And it happened almost without me knowing it. Like, I have this tremendous architecture of symbols now built up, and tools and stories and practices and rituals and regular that just sort of emerged. And if I had to sit down and explain them all to somebody, I would sound batshit. You mean, okay, this is
I
just a
don't,
thing?
I mean, that was one of the things that I was going to ask you about next was, given this, dictionary of symbols that you have, I guess, I don't know if you have it written out or contained somewhere within you, perhaps, is this something that you could create an oracle deck for, or, publish something like a book to give other people a means for understanding the way, that aspect. I know that one thing that I teach my clients is that we all have our own specific symbols. A lot of times they overlap because we are part of that collective unconscious, but then we have things that are very specific to us. And I think that that's really important to understand your own symbolism and, how that you interact with the world. But at the same time, I also see the how great it could be for you to share the way that you have interacted, because I think spirit shows us, you talk about how that it just sort of evolved over time and became the way that you experienced spirit and got into that flow, or what is it, the current you speak of. So that being said, perhaps it is something to be shared, or, somehow help people to understand their own symbols. I mean, I would love to hear more about, or have an oracle deck that you have created from the symbols that you have come to understand.
Yeah, making an oracle deck is something that I could see somebody on this kind of trajectory doing. It hasn't really called to me per se, because I am nowhere near done with tarot. You know, especially since I started throwing the Marseille a few years ago because Hodorowski made me. um, when
Gotcha. Yeah.
I'd been reading, Rider Waite Drive decks for since I was 13 and loved and used them and whatever. And then I found Alejandro Hodorowski's tarot book, and I was like, I love him as a filmmaker, and he's one of my heroes. But Christ, he's going to make me read the Marseille, isn't he?
I have heard this from a lot of folks.
Catching now, which is great. I'm seeing a lot of it around more and more that people are starting to use this really weird, hard read, challenging, old, messed up deck. But once I got into that, I realized that I could be in that oracle really deeply forever. If I am called to make an oracle deck, I definitely will. But it's not my thing. I do use astrology pretty extensively. Um, I have a private lexicon of numerology that doesn't correspond with anything that I've read or learned or just emerged. There are a few kind of overarching frames that were the ones that just resonated with me,
Yeah.
that provide that existed already. I mean, astrology and tarot are the two big examples. The I Ching sometimes, uh, where um, that is something to hang the improvisation on. Um, yeah, no, I'm not giving you much here as far as of reference works. um, Actually, one writer who I think has a similar sensibility is Aidan Wachter. It's a Six Ways. Um,
Who? I'm not familiar with that person. Who?
I believe he's in. He doesn't call what he does trash witchery at all, but I read it and it's like this is the kind of thing I do. Six Ways is the name of the title, and I believe he's based in rural the Southwest somewhere, Arizona or New Mexico. But he has this very kind of like be where you are kind of rubric. Um, but yeah, I'm in the process of figuring out how to codify this, and it probably will be a book eventually. Um, but it's really not. It's about defining your own practice, and it's about building your own narrative and trusting yourself to do that more than anything else. And so, making it prescriptive is kind of antithetical to that to begin with.
Yeah. I 100% agree with the idea of, you know, looking at these, I guess, schematics in a
Mhm.
way, like you speak about Gardner's Will of the Year, and how that it really doesn't work for, I live in Texas, so similar to where you're at as well. So it doesn't necessarily line up. And, when I was at one point in my practice, I took the Celtic tree Wheel of the Year and put my own trees into that space and started to, create my own understanding. I mean, like something that actually tracked with where I am. So I think that that is really important for us to do, especially when we're owning our own flow and our own space. I really hope that you do write a book on the work that you do, because I think it's really important for people to understand how to integrate everything into our own spaces and to really understand our own symbolism and the way that it works for us. One of the things I would like to ask you is you work with clients, and
Yes.
how does trash witchery play into the way that you read for clients or the way that you assist them on their own paths?
Well, for a while now, I mean, I had a fairly standard tarot practice for many years, where I was reading for people about relationships and health and work. The things you and
Yes.
family. There's the things you as a card reader you encounter, regularly. And what I moved away from that. I kind of bagged a lot of my previous, routines that way and started re-examining that. And now what I pretty much do exclusively is facilitating other people's practice. Like, how are you going to build practice? I'm dealing almost entirely with other witches right now. And in that case, what I do is use it to divine their own symbols that they may not be aware of
Mm.
from them and from their context and from their environments. It's like, what are you missing? You know, what is it with you now that is in the place where you are that you can draw on? And sometimes all it takes is an outside voice walking into your neighborhood and going, wow, that's cool, you know, and pointing out something that you hadn't seen before, you
Yeah.
know, and taking it back to the neighborhood analogy, wandering far afield, but like we've had that experience, and you live in Austin, which is a shining example of this happening. You get an out of towner in, and they want to do the corny stuff. You know,
Yes.
do you really want to go two step at the broken spoke? Like, is that really something you want to do? But you go and it's great. You know, when you have a great time, and you never would have done it if you didn't have a tourist. Um, so in my practice, the way I bring trash witchery to bear on readings for people is basically being a tourist in their environment, and point in their spiritual environment, and pointing out the things in their spiritual neighborhood that they may not have seen that they can use, in the same
Mm.
way that I would out a playing card, or the same way that I would point out a landmark, or the same way that I would point out, like, you know, hey, that creepy pedestrian tunnel under the freeway, let's go check that out. You know, and it's just a way yeah, that's how I'd put it. Being a tourist in their neighborhood is what I do. Um, but yeah, that's I guess that answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. Um, a lot of what you speak of is a very Western and Western urban. I know you said that it's not just urban, but the vibe I get is like a Western urban practice, or I guess, what is the word that I'm looking for? A Western urban way of looking at Buddhism and the being present and really, actually being here. Because, like you said, when we are on our social media platforms or tuned into a screen, we take everything around us for granted and don't see what it is that's in front of us. So if we are truly present, then we can begin to see what spirit is showing us. And I know I just reiterated everything that you had said, but I feel it does come across as quite Buddhist in, huh?
Did it more elegantly and in fewer words. So thank you for that.
No, I love that you have jumped in and given us a lot of story. You said that, there are some people who are natural storytellers, and I have a feeling that in a medieval setting, you would have been a bard, for sure. You would have told our stories beautifully.
Thank you. That sounds great. In real life, I work in marketing. So I guess that's the horrible late stage capitalist version of being a bard.
I'm a marketer also. That's one of my money making spaces.
A lot of witches who are. And here's another thing, is that actually some of the scariest, like deep, dark, like left hand path serious occultists I know work in marketing at a very high level. And
Huh.
it's because, as one of them explained to me, before I ran screaming into the night, that marketing, if you think about it, is a cult. What you're doing is you're creating incantations and showing magical images with the goal of compelling people to do a thing without them knowing it. And it works.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to share that with some of the folks that because I do marketing for spiritual communities and writers and in these cults. So that's awesome. Yeah, I used to do marketing for car companies, and no, I'd rather work for the spiritual folk. What were you gonna say?
I don't blame you at all. I did a bunch of work for a while where I was doing work exclusively for a bunch of terrible real estate companies and golf courses in South Florida. And I was like, I'm in the cannabis space now, which is considerably more humane in a way, but at the same time, it's an industry that exists because of rivers of blood and incarcerated people and, racism. So that and other things. In the practice, we have to confront the institutional failures that inform where we are, or else we're not really where we are. And actually, that touches on something I want to mention that's an advantage to being a trash witch, also, per you're bringing up the sort of Western viewpoint. Trash witchery is a great dodge to avoid cultural appropriation. It's great. If you're concerned about stepping on toes, or if you're concerned about, assimilating practices that you do not have ownership of, which I think a lot of us are these days, this is a great way to not do that. Where, I mean, even apart from the political and social justice ramifications of appropriating spiritual practices, it also just doesn't work. If I feel like, if in my experience, if you are not initiated, and if you're using, the tools and stories and rubric of, communities that you do not belong to, then it just isn't going to work on top of being questionable because you're not where you are. So this is something that people are concerned about doing. It's a lot of us are like, hey, do I have enough ownership of this to practice it and use it? Like, be a trash witch, because then you're using the tools and stories and narratives from where you actually are. And there's no risk of that. There's no risk of either, feeling like a poser or having your stuff not work or getting yelled at on the internet by angry people. So
Yeah, there's still some people are just going to be angry because they need an outlet for trying to process whatever they're having difficulty processing. I was called out today on a ridiculous post that somebody chose to misunderstand. And I was like, but at the same time, sensitivity is really important, and confronting those aspects. It's always good to take a good hard look. And I like the idea of being fully present in the moment, in the space where we are, and using those energies, and working with those energies, because really that's what magic is all about, is, processing and fine-tuning the energies within our space. So
absolutely. Another note on the platforms, and I don't want to have that conversation, but the call out thing, like, this is not the space for that, but it isn't like these platforms, these things we're on, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, nobody's on Facebook anymore except me, I guess, but they incentivize toxicity. This is another reason why I think they're spiritually degrading. They actually are calibrated to make people angry and to make people spiritually blocked, and to cause people to act in not socially, spiritually, or emotionally healthy ways. And the reason why they do that is, again, some occult left-hand path shit, because the toxicity keeps the butts in the seats. The toxicity keeps people scrolling past the advertising. And the more you do that, the more likely it is that they know what to sell you. And so when we see these things, these sort of kerfuffles arise online, it's like, I look at that and I'm like, you all are kind of being taken in by something that the baseline mechanics of this environment you have to be aware of. And like, so much of it is explainable by just how the architecture of the platforms is made, and the algorithms they use, and the incentives they provide. So, when I see blow-ups online, I just look at it, and at this point, it's like seeing the Matrix. I'm like, it's the algorithms. It's the algorithms.
Yeah, but, I think that so often it's become so integrated into our society, and, social media, there are a lot of people who have never grown up without it. So it's a situation where it is part of their world, and they don't even, we take for granted the fact that it's always listening, that shit is always present for marketing purposes. We're being marketed to all the time. And it's scary just how in our world and that has become, and how we've allowed it to be so integrated. I know a lot of folks who struggle with uh, an addiction to the social media platforms and constantly being on their screen and having disrupted sleeping patterns, and because they don't put it down. Not even, I guess it's recommended at least an hour before you go to bed, because um, the aspect of having that, being in front of a screen, the energy of the phone and whatnot is actually toxic to our being able to rest well. I also think, I know you said you didn't want to go into all of this, but it goes along with it, that I'm finding more and more folks. I am ADHD just by chemical makeup. That is, or as I like to, the new version called VAST, variable attention stimulus trait. Um, and just by nature, I am, that it is the chemical difference in my brain and the way I'm created. But I do believe that the way that energy or not information is given to us now and presented, that it's creating more of that behavior and processing issues as a result of, these flashes of information. So I don't think that most of the people, because, vast, this, is actually so rare, but more people are starting to have that experience. And I believe that that really is the way that we have so much thrown at us very quickly and in bite-sized little pieces. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, even if we want to continue the metaphor of the social media platforms as the and the the Lord of the Rings bad guy Sauron,
ah,
as the Sauron of our day, it would make sense that you're seeing more and more ADHD symptoms and ADHD behavior and thought patterning cropping up, because ADHD style behavior is profitable. It
is
is.
what?
It's profitable. If you're being trained to constantly be skipping to the next most stimulating thing, and you have that inclination at all, it's going to worm its way in there. It's going to string you out, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and reinforce this baseline mechanical aspect of how our minds work that already exists and becomes aggravated and exacerbated. And you mentioned the sleep thing about being exposed to screens, corrupting your sleep, which is true. And we need our sleep to be functional and aware and present. Um, like, I mean, you can see that it is physiologically and neurologically corrosive, to
Yes.
be on this constant. What you're seeking is dopamine hits, basically. When I know, like I said, I'm an addict. I do this all the time. But like, you're going to the next thing that feels good, next thing that feels good, next thing that feels good. And I also have ADHD. It's severe, and that's what we do. We skate around from things that feel good, the things that interest us. There's that hyper focus that comes in, and then you move on to something else. You can go down a rabbit hole and stay there for days, and a lot of the time you're feeling really anxious and wanting something that makes you feel better. And this
Mm-hmm.
things that feel better endlessly, forever and ever and ever. And I've, being a witchy storytellery type person, do think of it as it's a cult. It's literally a cult. And and I mean, not in the, and this is sounding really conspiracy theoristy. I don't think that Mark Zuckerberg is on top of his mansion at night trying to summon the Whore of Babylon. Actually, it would be kind of cool if he was.
True.
As we know, as of course the actual definition of the word occult is hidden,
Mm-hmm.
and the hidden agendas of the platforms are again, they give us symbols, they show us images, they show us incantations that mold our behavior, and if that's not a cult, I don't know what is. So taking a posture of conscious rebellion against it, because it is so overwhelming, and developing an alternative practice that grounds you in that Buddhist way and where you are, and seeing the world the way it actually is, and allowing it to show you where spirit shows up. You know, because of course, you know, the spirit wants to show you where it is, and it does. And so if you're open to it, it'll take you places. But all this participation in this kind of, you know, total dominance of manipulated spaces, it just keeps us from being able to see that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and even
Yeah.
actually compromising our own neurochemistry. Um, so I mean, I'm sounding like a total Luddite, and like I said, like anyone who knows me is watching this going, "This bitch." You know, she's always got her face in her phone. Of course, she's always showing me things she found on Reddit or YouTube. But you know, we awareness does go a long way, and like it's and then taking it back to the Trash Witch story, it's about understanding the baseline mechanics of the environment you're in,
Mm-hmm.
and then, you know, training yourself to see, You see that current show, spirit reveals itself. You know where to go next. You know?
Yeah. I you know, we talk about being in the current, being in the flow. Okay, somebody is about to just asked, they said, I'm sorry if I missed this, but what has been one of the most striking magic moments that got you interested in magic or trash magic? So, and this is a question for both of us, but I'm going to let you go first. One thing I will say, and this is a question from Sarah Louise. I hope I did not fuck up your name. If I did, I apologize. But what I will say is that, you know, you coined the term trash magic or trash witchery. So, so tell us what was the most striking magic moment that got you into that space of working with trash witchery.
You know what? I mean, I am not a natively extremely psychically or spiritually sensitive person, which is kind of funny because it runs on both sides of my family in a really, really intense way. Like I'm on all sides by natural witches. And then there's me. I'm kind of, I mean, intuitive certainly, but, you know, kind of more, it's something I have to work really hard for. And what it started really was really wanting it to be true, really wanting there to be magic badly, you know, and wanting to be able to do it and wanting power. Because let's not fool ourselves. You know, there's a lot of pretty talk in self-help, wellness, and metaphysical spaces about how we're all engaging in self-care and empowerment. Great. You know, that's
Uh-huh.
lovely. But it feels more passive than the real motivation, I think, behind this, which is we want power. We want to be able to exert power. We want to be able to affect our own lives and the lives of the people we care about in our world positively. You know, we want to be able to make that happen. And in my case, the moment was finding books when I was a kid going, wait, you can be a witch? Really? This is a thing you can do? I'm going to try this and see if it works. And it didn't for a long time, and then it started to, you know, and since then it was really training myself to exist in that space that made the moment start happening. And that since then have come thick and fast, like thick and fast. Um, but yeah, no, it was desire. It was desire for power, straight up. It was what it
So
was.
if I'm hearing you correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, it was your desire to be within that space that created the a space for the magical moments to occur.
Yeah,
Yes?
it
Okay.
was it was wanting it. It was wanting to live in a world with magic. And because
Gotcha.
at that point I didn't think that it was one, you know, and but then it turns out that it is. But I want to hear your answer.
Um, wow. Well, first of all, I'm going to go back to what you had said because I fully believe that when we start to notice the current or look for the current and, you know, begin to be within that space, that the synchronicities show us that we are. That's what a synchronicity is. It's telling us we are on our right path, that we are, you know, to keep going, you know, and also giving us a little nudge in, you know, to continue in that direction. So that's what I see synchronicities as. I don't know if your definition is similar. Um,
That's
uh, I'm a huge Robert Anton Wilson was a huge um, uh, mind shift for me. You know, I read Cosmic Trigger when I was a teenager, and that book informed a lot of how I see the world because he doesn't tell you how to think. He shows you things and said, what do you think? How does this parse for you? You know, play with it and see. But I think I don't know if there is any specific moment that I could pinpoint. You talk about coming from a long line of spiritually in tune people, people who had strong abilities or gifts, depending on how you want to. I believe ability is the way that I prefer to look at that, because I think we all can develop that. Um, but I was born with really intense developed abilities. And what's interesting is that my parents also have those, but when they manifested in me or I showed that I had those, it scared the fuck out of them. And you know, having somebody discount, you know, everything that you're experiencing and seeing for, you know, when I found out that other people celebrated that shit, I was like, oh, sign me the fuck up for that. You know, you know, I don't, I don't want to believe that I'm crazy, first of all, because I know that well, I believe that I have, you know, a pretty strong hold on reality, and that what I'm experiencing is part of that fabric of reality. It's just another layer that maybe somebody else can't see as clearly or chooses not to see at all. So I think the universe just threw people and situations and things into my life. That's the way I choose to see it, that were meant to keep me focused and veering toward the path of working with magic. I don't necessarily know that, I mean, I actually believe that, you know, when I heard about how you call this way of um, uh, walking through the universe, trash witchery, I do practice that, you know, in many ways. Like when you talk about picking up found objects or seeing found objects and integrating them and seeing them as signs, and working with that energy, I do that also. Not to the focused intentional level that you speak of, but yeah, I think it is when we are in alignment with spirit. Spirit shows us a lot, you know, and brings a lot of things into our world. There's a, you know, it's interesting I don't know if this falls in alignment with this, but, you know, as I sometimes let people, when I'm doing shows and reading cards at events, people will bring me things as not gifts, but barter. You know, they're like, hey, can I barter for a reading? And a lot of times I'll feel compelled to do that. And people have brought me so many different things that weren't for me, that ended up finding their way to the person they were meant for. And I feel like maybe that is also part of that trash witchery situation. Do you know what I mean? Does
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
seem like it's in alignment?
That absolutely is. Yeah, no, and objects certainly find where they want to go ultimately. And, you know, if we're a conduit for that, then yeah, that's very much in the spirit of the thing, for sure. For sure. And we know we find something that seems like it should be right and isn't. And then you hand it over to somebody else and it's the thing they were looking for. I think that's an experience every sort of woo-woo person has had at least once, you know, about being,
Mhm.
and you mentioned it straight off the bat, you know, about moving the rocks, about the cards, about being in just in the currents with all the stuff and flotsam and weirdness and hypodermic needles and shopping carts and all the other random stuff that's floating around here. You mentioned Robert Anton Wilson, though. I have to mention something about what I was thinking about, you know, in working up to this conversation was who in the world who I could point to and say, that is a trash witch. And interestingly, as far as I know, none of them are actually occultists. But one of them, the first one who sprung to mind, was Adam Curtis, the documentarian. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I
Um,
don't think I am.
he's Adam Curtis. His new doc is all on YouTube, and it's called "Can't Get You Out of My Head." And what Curtis does is it's really kind of a head fuck because it looks and sounds exactly like a TV documentary. And he's like a TV news historical documentary. And he has this BBC reader voice with a voiceover and all this stuff. And so you watch it like, okay, this is going to tell me a story about history, but it's not. And what he does is he accumulates these stories throughout history and assembles them out of found footage and weaves them together in these strands like DNA that ultimately point to how we got where we are. But he doesn't
Mm.
actually tell you. He'll tell 3 or 4 parallel stories that all kind of nudge you towards this idea about, I mean, what he's fundamentally interested in is what all occultists are interested in, which is power and how power is exerted and how power exerts itself. And he's been making docs for years, but that is what he does. And he does it by accumulating things, pasting them together so that they form this braid, and he just sort of carries you along. It's really kind of psychedelic. Can't Get You Out of My Head. Everybody should watch it. The first episode is called Bloodshed on Wolf Mountain, and it's all on YouTube. But I mentioned him in light of Robert Anton Wilson because in this one has one of the through lines is the Discordians, actually. The role they played in ultimately, shaping our world, which they started out doing more or less as a joke. So, and I had no idea the depth to which Discordian philosophy influenced a great deal of what we're seeing now, almost completely unbeknownst to the people who are actually participating in it. But there's a direct lineage back to the Discordians and a lot of stuff we're seeing now. Actually, QAnon, like direct lineage back to it, actually what the Discordians did as a joke in the early 60s because they were bored and playing with the idea of chaos. Not kidding. Anyway, Adam Curtis is a trash witch straight up, and I can't recommend his work enough. But yeah, like just mentioning Wilson, I was like, she's got to know about this. You got to watch it. I'll send you the link.
Oh yes, please do, because that sounds absolutely right up my alley.
Yeah.
And Robert Anton Wilson, funny enough, is the person who poked me. If you know much about Discordians, yes. So that is my one, like, had to share.
Be poked by.
I know.
A great one to be poked by.
Yeah, so he made me a pope in the Discordian.
Love it. Love it. This is a strange and wonderful world that we live in, as dysfunctional and terrible and soul corrosive as it frequently is, and training yourself to see all of it.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I really love about your approach, I know so many folks who get really caught up in the woo-woo, right? And without the pragmatic aspect, without the very reality-based, what we know, what we understand, very skeptical viewpoint. And what I'm seeing from you, and maybe it's just a projection because I'm interacting with you for the first time on here, but I too am like 50% I don't believe any of this shit, and 50% I'm fully immersed. And I feel that, those two aspects coming together and working help me, like it feels more balanced for me. And that's maybe not true for other people, but that's it helps me stay grounded.
I think it's essential. And actually my clients and friends and coworkers, will laugh at me about this because I preface pretty much every session or every discussion of any of this with the statement, this is all bullshit. All total bullshit. But if you are aware that you are playing pretend, and playing pretend is one of the most valuable, potent learning experiences that we have. Playing pretend is a function of, as far as we know, no other animal on earth has a more well-developed sense of playing pretend than humans do. We can tell these narratives, and our stories and our fantasies and our fairy tales and all these things help us parse our worlds. And it doesn't have to be literally true, although sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. But, you know, if you think about what you learned about life from fiction, I've learned more from fiction about how things are than, you know, any real thing. And what you're describing, you know, the balance between the woo-woo and the total skepticism and practicality is vital. It's vital because people get lost. They do, you know, and end up in some really toxic, you know, spaces, and getting sick and getting taken advantage of and wasting a lot of money on things they don't need. And, you know, I do not condemn anybody's practice ever for 1 second, but I do see a kind of real spiritual hunger in people who don't experience that balance and that skepticism and that grounding in reality that I find really troubling. And there's a lot of that around, you know.
Yeah.
So definitely, yeah, like the this is all bullshit. But at the same time it's not. And
Yeah, this is a conversation I've had with some people that I hold dear and who I trust them, and we have a lot of really deep conversations about how that, you know, we're shown so many different perspectives. And sometimes it's just necessary to fucking choose a perspective, you know, understanding that all of the other perspectives are valid, but you have to choose a perspective and stand in a space in order to be able to see what else is present. So, you know, maybe one day I choose to see the world from the perspective of the ultimate skeptic, and maybe the next day you know, chaos magic for the win, you know. And I think that, you know, we do shape our own reality. That's something that maybe is a bit misunderstood, but is 100% true. So, you know, you have to choose that perspective in order to be able to function, especially when it comes to magical spaces, I think.
oh yeah, yeah, no, if you don't have that, it's not going to work. As long as you know, if I even taking any kind of moral or, you know, critical judgment out of, you know, how I observe other people practicing, it's like a lot of the time I see this is like, if you are not grounded in reality, it's just straight up not going to work. You're wasting your time. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it takes a really, you know, kind of freakishly gifted adept to work entirely in the realm of unreality. They exist. They're really rare, you know. But
I
yeah,
mean, we're trying to affect reality, so of course we have to have a foot in it, at
yeah.
least. You know, in order to create it, we have to be able to, you know, also see the world from the perspective of where we are trying to affect.
Yeah,
So, well,
garbage and all.
exactly. Like checking the time. Oh my goodness, we have 2 minutes.
That flew by.
Um, It really did. I thought I was going to look, and we were going to have another 30 minutes. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to message them to either of us. I'll be tagging you on the video before I put it on IGTV.
Right.
And then I'll also be putting it on YouTube. My YouTube link is in my bio. Give us a plug. Tell us where we can find information about how to get in touch with you, how somebody could schedule a reading with you.
Right
Promote.
now, web presence, it is all on the gram. So come join my 17 followers. I blog. It's very good company, I promise. It really is. But yeah, no, I blog. Every third post is a blog post about all of this. about trash witchery and improvisational practice and tarot and divination and, you know, spirit work in general. And you can reach me here, hit me up for reading. I will work for cash or barter, depending if the barter is right. I'm comfortable with that as well. I do focus my reading in my tarot work on developing practice. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is about refining and, you know, what you ever your spiritual practice may be. I am here to help you optimize it. By So that's what I do, and I am overjoyed to hear from anyone who would be interested in that.
Yeah, I love that that is your focus because you speak about how that how empowering, how you search for the power within your own world, as a means of, you know, as why you practice magic overall. And so when you help people define and refine their practice, you're giving them that as well. So
Yeah,
that's beautiful, that all of it in alignment. And I
it is.
thank you. This has been wonderful. Like I said, it's the first time that you and I have spoken, for real, except via a few direct messages. So
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for rolling the bones and letting my crazy ass on your show. This was a treat and a pleasure, and, you know, very much needed at this moment, actually. So, I appreciate it. And no, this was great. This is great. We should do it again.
we should come up with another topic you want to talk about, and let's schedule it because I love the way you look at the world. I love your insight, and I want to hear more.
Emma complains about shit next time on TNT. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful, much love to you and yours.
Yes, and thank you for to everyone who tuned in. We had quite a great viewership today, so
Yeah.
many
Oh,
blessings,
a lot
everybody. Huh?
are, I just got to say, a lot of the folks who are here are my folks, and definitely follow the show. Check this out. It is weekly and it is great and has a really interesting bunch of people. So it's appointment viewing. So be sure to keep showing up.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, take care, everyone.
Bye.